Hello and welcome to Why Is This Happening with me, your host, Chris Hayes. There's so many scandals in the Trump administration, even sort of by the day, by the week, they kind of pile atop each other, and it's easy to lose sight of them. And even for us, we try to cover them all the time. And I think one of the most outrageous has to do with an individual named Andrew Tate, who's sort of a misogynistic influencer, I guess is the best way to put it. He's a former kickboxer who kind of built this online business of being a right-wing anti-feminist, outright misogynistic, pro-patriarchal influencer who talks about dominating women, about hurting them, about enslaving them, being rough with them. He's faced criminal investigation in the UK. He and his brother fled to Romania, where they were raided by the police after women made complaints about sexual assault and sexual trafficking. And they were facing charges there in Romania, and they were kind of not allowed to leave the country. And then after Donald Trump got elected in 2024, within a few weeks, they were released. They came back to the U.S., and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis actually was very angry they came back and kind of decried their arrival. Andrew Tate was then subsequently accused of sexual assault here in the U.S., and although the Los Angeles DA declined to prosecute, he is being investigated for human trafficking by Florida's Attorney General, and this was very soon after his return. And the full scale of what these two men have been accused of, the public record is truly astounding and horrifying. And there's an incredible piece of investigative reporting in The New Yorker called Andrew Tate's Empire of Abuse that I think for the first time I've encountered puts all the reporting in one place about this story. And I just think it's particularly, as we think about Epstein, think about how did people allow this to happen, watching this story unfold about Andrew Tate and his brother, which has gotten 1/100th the attention, even though it's happening right now. I thought it'd be a good time to go through this remarkable and outrageous and enraging story. Heidi Blake is the investigative reporter at The New Yorker who wrote the piece, which is called Andrew Tate's Empire Abuse. This conversation was recorded on June 24th, 2026. We should note at the top here that Andrew and Tristan Tate, his brother, have denied any wrongdoing. Andrew Tate told The New Yorker he's never done anything wrong in his life, that's a quote, and insisted that none of the women he recruited accused him of crimes. We should also warn that this conversation includes discussions of elect sexual abuse and sexual assault. Here's our conversation. Heidi, welcome to the program.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
How did you first sort of start on this story?
So I've been following Andrew Tate's rise for some time, and ever since he was arrested in Romania back in 2022 on those sex trafficking charges, I've been kind of interested in the case against him and in the enormous influence that he wields on young men all around the world. But it was really when he was released from the travel ban that held him in Romania alongside his brother Tristan, as you say, under pressure from the Trump administration, and since then has been traversing the globe freely, expanding his influence, accruing more wealth, and continuing to propagate this message of violent misogyny, which has become so pervasive that I really felt like I want to get to the bottom of what this guy really did. And Andrew Tate, since being released, has said that he's totally innocent of all wrongdoing, that he is the victim of a political smear campaign by liberal elites who are trying to silence him and don't like his views about, what he calls traditional masculinity. And that there's no evidence and the whole thing's going to fall away. And the evidence against him in Romania is all sealed away in sealed court files, out beyond public view. And so what I really wanted to do was try to get to grips with what is the evidence, what can I get hold of, what can I assess, and piece it all together. And as you say, in one place so that people can make their own minds up about what Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan have actually done, not just what they've said, but what have they done over the past 10 years.
I want to start a little bit with him as a sort of public figure. Just for people that don't know about him and sort of situate him first in sort of what his kind of public profile is and how far reaching it is. And then maybe we could talk about his politics and sort of his, endorsement of Trump and his kind of inclusion in the kind of right-wing MAGA sphere.
Right. So Andrew Tate started out as a kickboxer. He was a 4 times kickboxing world champion. He also appeared on the British reality TV show Big Brother. But he made his fortune in webcam pornography. And he then parlayed the money that he made in compelling women to perform sex shows online into a growing online following of young men who were drawn to these posts about diamond watches and supercars and private jets and cigars and all of the kind of trappings of extreme wealth. And he mixed those in with misogynistic rants and masculinist pep talks, and kind of developed this creed that young men are the victims of a feminized society and need to reassert what he calls their natural masculine imperative for power. Um, he really started to hone that message at the height of the Me Too movement, when he kind of sparked a big viral controversy by tweeting that women should take responsibility for being sexually assaulted, should bear the blame for that. And in the controversy that followed, he became a kind of alt-right star. He started to appear on like InfoWars, and he went to CPAC, as Conservative Political Action Conference, and started to make common cause with a number of figures on the alt-right and the far right. He attracted the attention of Donald Trump Jr. And was invited to meet with him at Trump Tower quite soon after that. And so he began to kind of cultivate this sort of political identity alongside his kind of presence on social media as an influencer. But it was in 2022, which coincidentally is the same year he was arrested on these sex trafficking charges, that he devised this really ingenious strategy to turbocharge his online fame, which was that he launched an online school called Hustlers University, where 168,000 students enrolled to learn what Tate billed as modern wealth creation methods. This thing was really just a gigantic content factory for him. It ran an affiliate marketing program. It seemed to be the main way students made money. And they made money by earning commissions by reposting Tate's content online. They were given access to a big library of all of his videos and his podcast appearances. They clipped them up, they reposted them. And so all of a sudden, in the summer of 2022, when this thing was launched, there are suddenly tens of thousands of social media accounts just blasting out endless amounts of Tate's content and earning commissions by doing so, and pumping that stuff into algorithms that we know are primed to amplify misogynistic and extreme content. And so that summer, Tate just exploded. He was everywhere. He was suddenly on the phone screens of pretty much every teenage boy around the world. And his message was suddenly in the mouths of teenage boys in homes and classrooms everywhere. And that was when he really exploded hugely in terms of his viral fame. And then later that year, he's arrested on human trafficking charges. And he was able to portray that arrest as being a reaction to his enormous fame and influence, and not really about actually having done anything wrong. And that's kind of how he gained so much currency on the right, really. And people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and other very prominent right-wing figures queued up to defend him and to kind of bill him as a free speech martyr.
Yeah, I mean, Tucker Carlson had him on his Fox show quite a bit, right? Sort of, and very friendly. You're kind of a martyr for, they're trying to shut you down because of your politics and what you say. And we should be just clear, like, first of all, that I remember encountering him on the algorithm that way and being like, who's this guy? But also, like, there's some level which is like, you can be a rich, jacked dude like me and, get women. But it goes beyond that. I mean, the ideology that he sort of pushes is the subjugation, domination, and use of women as objects, that you should kind of hate them, that they're stupid and unworthy, that they're only good for sex, that the only way that anything works in heterosexuality is this sort of form of like relentless domination and subjugation. And that's what it was like. I just want to distinguish this. Like, there's a whole world of like trad wives, and like we're like on the farm and we have traditional gender roles. And I would say this goes even much further beyond that. Would you say that's a fair characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of interesting that people like, say, Tucker Carlson, who kind of make common cause with him, try and portray Tate as being really just a champion of traditional masculinity, traditional values. There's nothing traditional about what Tate is preaching.
Yes, exactly.
He's talking overtly about sexual violence. He's talking
about
being
a pimp. That's his model. The model is
right.
Not the father of a household in which a woman has the domestic sphere and is raising the kids. The model is a pimp, quite by his own lights, in which you accrue many women, you manipulate them and use them, you have them perform sexual acts so that you make money off them. That's explicitly what he promotes. That's
absolutely right. And he taught his followers to do the very same thing. He sold a program called the Pimping Hose Degree, the PhD, in which he taught them how to recruit women for sex work, subjugate them, take all of their money, isolate them from their friends and family, and generally control and coerce them. So he's very explicit about that. He also, he and his brother Tristan both have built up a what they call harem of women, and they have talked explicitly about impregnating as many women as they possibly can. Tate recently said, "I'm the big gorilla. I take the fertile females and impregnate them." They've talked about having double-digit children. These are not the sort of traditional values that people like Tucker Carlson purport to espouse. But I think that Tate is very good at kind of donning different skin suits depending on who he's talking to. And so when he does go on Tucker Carlson's show and sit down with him, he's pretty good at seeming to kind of ventriloquize those sorts of ideas and notions in a way that like makes him palatable in that moment. And it feels like people like Carlson and others are kind of willing to just turn away and look away from all of the other stuff online in which he talks very overtly, as you say, about sexual violence and pimping and exploitation of women.
And the way that he made his money, he said he was a kickboxer. He was a very successful kickboxer. He was good at kickboxing, but he didn't make much money. It was in web pornography, and again through a kind of classic model that men have been using for time immemorial, which is sort of recruiting, psychologically manipulating women into a kind of fundamental exploitative relationship in which they do all the work and he gets all the money. And he built this huge, basically very profitable webcam empire off of getting women to do that for him.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And he's talked in the past about how he kind of figured out around the time he won his 4th world title in kickboxing that he just wasn't making enough money from the sport. He sat down, he thought, how am I gonna get rich? And he figured out that as he traveled the world in kickboxing tournaments, he had acquired a number of girlfriends. And in his words, women are females are an asset. And he had to find a way to monetize the assets. And the way that he found was to bring these women to the UK and persuade them to work for him on webcam and to take all of their money. Now, the first woman that he brought over to the UK to do this was a 17-year-old Slovakian teenager who he had met when she was in high school, and he immediately put her on webcam under the guise of a Russian woman in her 20s. It's illegal in the UK and in the US and in many countries to make sexual images of anybody under 18, so this falls under child pornography laws. But as I say, they kind of presented her as an older woman. He started to make a load of money from her, including having sex with her himself on camera and also beating and whipping and abusing her in a number of videos, some of which are still available online. And having then started to make money that way, he and his brother started systematically reaching out to other women on social media and on dating sites and trying to grow this business.
Just for legal purposes, I mean, I don't know what he says about this woman that you're talking about who was underage. I mean, there is video. We know what year it was, right? That she's underage. Like,
that's right.
It's fairly clear cut. Does he deny that? Does he say she was of age? Like, what does he say?
He did not answer my questions on that particular point. He denies any wrongdoing, denies coercing anyone, denies
Right.
it all.
Right.
But in the case of this young woman, I confirmed her date of birth through official sources and also through people who know her closely. And I, was able to track her online presence and could see the videos that had been uploaded online when she was only 17 years old. There's a pretty clear digital trail that shows the kind of growth of her career working for Tate. And also, I confirmed that with people who knew her, who worked alongside her at the time. And also, in prosecutorial files, prosecutors themselves confirmed that she was underage at that time. It's all in the sort of sealed files that I obtained in the Romanian case. So there's really no doubt about it. She was underage and she was working for him and performing very explicit sex acts, including having sex with him on camera. And
really violent scenes in which he physically assaults her, beats her with a belt.
That's right. Yeah, there's a really harrowing video in which she is lying kind of semi-naked in the fetal position, sobbing while he beats her and berates her. This actually surfaced during his time on the Big Brother show in the UK, because he had a number of paying customers who he would do these live sex shows with this young woman for the right amount of money. And some of those people remembered him when he went on Big Brother. And so some of those videos were leaked online. And at the time he said, oh, this is an ex-girlfriend. This was just role play. We were just having a laugh. This is nothing. And people didn't kind of figure out that this was actually a webcam worker he was kind of compelling to do this work, or indeed that she was actually underage at the time.
He does face face a criminal investigation in the UK. He starts expanding out. There's more and more women. And we should just say, like, again, having spent a lot of time going through the Epstein files and reading about Epstein, that there are some pattern recognitions that emerge. I mean, the sort of mass at scale recruitment of women, sort of routinizing it through, doing it, using a kind of trusted woman as a kind of validator, which Ghislaine Maxwell is, serving prison time for being that for Jeffrey Epstein. And many of the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein talked about how crucial she was in sort of validating and kind of making think, oh, it's not as weird as I think, and sort of drawing them in. He also has women that have sort of played that role. I think is it fair to say in the kind of mass recruitment? I mean, we're talking about dozens, hundreds of women, right, who have.
Yeah, certainly. In the prosecutorial files I've seen, prosecutors have identified several dozen women who they say were coerced in this way. Andrew Tate himself, in private messages to associates, said that he had used these methods on more than 100 young women, and his brother has obviously recruited more. And they've both said that at the height of their business, they had 75 women living and working in their properties at that particular moment in time. So this happened at scale. And as you say, in a very systematized, very deliberate way, they used very studied methods of psychological manipulation and of gradually eroding the self-esteem and the support networks of these women, also targeting women who came from troubled backgrounds, who were experiencing difficulty in their personal lives, who came from poverty.
Who needed money, yeah.
He needed money. And all of this was really studied. These guys read books about pimping and about sexual exploitation, and then they taught it to their followers. They went out and they kind of codified their techniques and laid them out and encouraged other men to follow them. So this was very, very deliberate and calculated.
What is the first time that there's a criminal inquiry or criminal complaint in the UK about Andrew Tate?
So the first woman who went to the police about Andrew Tate did so in 2014. She was a woman who had dated him for a few weeks and said that during that time he strangled and raped her twice. And so he pretty explicitly discussed these alleged assaults in these messages. Police actually at the time discouraged this woman from pressing charges. They didn't know who Tate was. They didn't really understand the scale of the thing. The following year, two more women came forward and accused him of similar crimes. Both accused him of strangulation. One accused him of rape. They were the next couple of women that Tate had recruited to his webcam business after this Slovakian teenager that I mentioned. Both, absconded and made these allegations against him. But before police could move forward with the case, Andrew Tate left the country and moved to Romania. And he's very explicitly said that he left the country because of this police case and because he wanted to move to a place where he felt it was sort of more conducive to build the kind of business that he was trying to build.
And so in Romania, they get a compound and they continue this business. And he brags about how wired he has the country and how corrupt it is and how he can, he's never, he's basically outside the law. I mean, he's saying this publicly. But they get raided by the police after Tristan recruits a woman to come there from the US, right?
That's right. Yeah, and I think it's kind of telling that the police, who I can see in the files that I have, had sat on a number of previous reports in which women, they've been given evidence indicating that women were being coerced into sex work by the Tates, Romanian women.
Romanian women had complained to the police or gone to the police who were experiencing this, and it had basically nothing had happened.
That's right. All members of their, or family members had made complaints and nothing had happened. It's when the brothers recruit this US citizen, a young woman from Miami, and she manages to get distress messages out to a family friend and to her parents. They report it to the US Embassy, and the US Embassy alerts local police. And at that point, they're kind of forced to do something. This was under the Biden administration, and the State Department was putting pressure on Romania to get to grips with its pretty serious trafficking problem, in which official corruption plays a very significant part. And so in that political climate, the authorities were pretty eager to go after them after, being asked to do so by the US Embassy. And that's when you get the initial indictment for sex trafficking that followed against the brothers.
There are, in the course of your reporting, I sort of lost count, but I mean, you have multiple allegations. I don't know how many, detailed with sometimes corroborating contemporaneous text messages, sometimes contemporaneous police reports or hospital reports of violent rape by Andrew Tate against women.
Right. Yeah, there are absolutely multiple reports from different women in different periods of time, different jurisdictions, different countries who didn't know each other and who describe extraordinarily similar allegations. They talk about him strangling them during sex. They talk about him forcing himself upon them while strangling them. Often they talk about him battering them around the head. They all, or many of them, describe similar injuries, this kind of petechiae, which is like a form of burst blood vessels around the eyes that you often get from acute pressure in the head from strangulation. Like many of them report the same symptom. And a number of them have medical reports that corroborate this. And then there are separate allegations against Tristan. In all, I spoke to a dozen women who are alleged victims of either rape or sex trafficking by the brothers. I gathered witness accounts and evidence relating to many more victims. And as you say, I looked at their text messages, had access to thousands of the brothers' messages in which you can see them not only recruiting women through this very calculated method of sort of romancing them and then luring them into sex work. But also in the case of Andrew Tate in particular, very clearly threatening violence, threatening to rape women who've upset him, threatening to beat women. The evidence is there in black and white in the messages as well as in these women's own accounts.
And we should just reiterate that he denies any wrongdoing, any criminal wrongdoing, a blanket denial from him that he's never engaged in any criminal activity whatsoever. That's what and you interviewed him, right?
That's right. I did. Yeah, I did. And he does deny it. Well, he also, he says that the text messages that have been filed in court have all been kind of mistranslated. They're all wrong. He does, he disavows everything. He disavows all of the evidence. But he also claims that not a single woman has ever accused him of any crime, which is clearly untrue because I've spoken to a number of them, and there are plenty of women who are accusing him. But yeah, I did. I spent time with the brothers in Bucharest.
One of the women who has accused him of violent rape is a woman who this story I found so harrowing. Is a woman who sort of came to prominence online in the height of Me Too as a kind of anti-feminist woman, and sort of created an online persona saying that women were being weak or making it up or bore responsibility for sexual assault, that this entire Me Too thing was hysteria. And she became a kind of champion on the right. And then she gets invited by Tate to come visit him in Romania. Can you tell me about this woman and then what she says happened after she has cultivated this identity online as essentially a kind of Me Too skeptic, contrarian about sexual assault of women?
Yeah, I agree. This is such a haunting story. So this is the story of a Canadian YouTuber and alt-right activist called Lauren Southern. He became really a huge alt-right star and a darling of the manosphere, as you say, around sort of 2017, 2018. And she was invited to Romania by Andrew Tate. He was offering to finance a kind of far-right media channel that she would be fronting. But during the course of those discussions, he and his brother Tristan took her out to a nightclub. And she then describes how she suddenly became sort of feeling blackout drunk after a couple of drinks. And the next thing she knew, Tate's taken her back to her hotel room. And then she describes being very violently assaulted and strangled and raped by him in a way that tracks very closely with what other women have described. She describes how the following morning he said to her, "Don't tell the press that I raped you." And she left. She discovered the burst blood vessels around her eyes that other women have described. She discovered marks on her neck. She went to a sexual assault nurse in Toronto when she got home, who assessed her injuries, who noted that she had suffered like one particularly intimate injury, and described how she'd given this account of being raped and strangled by a well-known figure in the hotel in Romania. So there's contemporaneous documentation to support her account. This nurse also noted that she was experiencing personal struggles with her belief system as a result of what had happened. And she really did, she really talked to me about how she tried hard to apply her kind of political convictions to what had happened to her. And she told herself it was her fault for meeting and being alone with a man she didn't know, for going drinking with him. She tried to blame herself. But she found she couldn't reconcile that with her lived experience of what had happened. And she ultimately texted Andrew Tate and said to him, look, I know, she kind of continued at that point, taking some responsibility, saying I was a moron, I shouldn't have been there. But it was really shitty what you did to me. You shouldn't, that was wrong. And you raped me and you strangled me when I said I didn't want to have sex. And she really put it to him. And he said to her, this is some liberal Me Too bullshit and you're embarrassing yourself. And kind of batted it away like that.
Mm.
And she said to me that she really felt that there was no way she could retain her status in the right-wing world if she ever spoke out about this. It would completely destroy her whole platform, her brand, what she was known for. And so she stayed silent for a long time. But she's really gone on a journey. And so by the time I spoke with her, she had renounced a lot of her former political views and convictions, and she really felt deep regret about the way she had kind of ridiculed women protesting sexual violence in the past. And when she learned that some of these UK victims, those women who reported Tate for rape and assault back in 2014 and 2015, are really struggling to get justice. They've launched a civil suit against him in the UK, and they are trying to pursue him through the courts. She decided she wanted to stand side by side with them, and so she has offered to testify in that case, and she's gone public with her story. And so it's been a really profound journey, I think, for her, but absolutely harrowing, as you say.
The Romanian case seemed a little strangely frozen, just as I monitored to it. Can you give us so he gets the police show up in 2022 after this American is like literally sending panic distress calls back to the U.S. being like, these guys are bad news. I think she says they're definitely sex traffickers, or there's definitely sex trafficking women. The police, this goes to the embassy go to the police show up, they raid them. They now have this case. They can't travel outside the country. It doesn't seem like the case. What was the status of the case when Donald Trump wins in 2024?
So by 2024, the Tate brothers had been indicted for trafficking a number of women who they held in a particular property outside Bucharest. They'd also been indicted for forming an organized crime gang to traffic women, and kind of with a number of associates who were indicted alongside them. And prosecutors had expanded the investigation and were looking at dozens of other cases in which the brothers were suspected of trafficking women in a similar way, including at least two minors, women who were underage at the time, one of whom Andrew Tate was accused of raping. But in 2024, very soon after Donald Trump was reelected, first of all, the indictment was suddenly rejected by the Court of Appeal and sent back to prosecutors, and they were told to fix a number of technical errors before the case could proceed. And then the next thing that happened was, under pressure from the Trump administration, as you've said, suddenly prosecutors decide to release the Tate brothers from their travel ban. I spoke to a senior Romanian law enforcement source who said to me this was totally bizarre and could only have come as a result of pressure from outside the judicial system. Because, in his words, it is not normal for individuals accused of child trafficking to be allowed to travel freely, which seems like a kind of reasonable position. But yeah, as he said, they were released. And
I'm going to jump in here to repeat what I said at the beginning of this episode. You've probably heard before. The Tate brothers have consistently denied any allegations of rape, human trafficking, and exploitation. What do we know about what the Trump administration? I mean, this was just a week after inauguration, I want to say, right? I mean, this was very, very soon after. What do we know about the role the Trump administration played?
so we know that, in the weeks and months leading up to the election, a number of prominent Trump supporters and figures within MAGA, Donald Trump Jr., Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, and others had kind of publicly defended Andrew Tate, described the case against him as a conspiracy, as a kind of hit job, and just generally supported him. So I think it was pretty clear to the Romanians that if Trump got in, they were not going to get a favorable reception from US officials on the subject of this case against the Tate brothers. And, from political figures I spoke to, they were keenly aware of that. And, for Romania, the US is a vital strategic ally, particularly because the country borders Ukraine. It relies on the US for its defense. Yep. They suddenly find themselves in a precarious position. And then what happens is there is a Romanian election in which, in the first round of voting, a far-right pro-Russian candidate, Călin Georgescu, suddenly shoots into the lead and wins the first round of voting out of nowhere. Absolutely nobody sees this coming. And soon after, Romania's constitutional court annuls the result and says this is a result of Russian interference. And at that point, JD Vance, Elon Musk, like a number of prominent figures all weigh in against Romania and say that liberals have stolen the election. This is another example of how Romania is militating against people who aren't woke, alongside criticizing Romania over its handling of the Tate case. At the same time, I was told by a woman who, until very recently, worked as the Tate brothers spokeswoman, Matea Petrescu, that
Hmm.
the team of people who were working for the Tate brothers approached Richard Grenell, who has just been named Trump's special presidential envoy, and enlisted him to help them get their travel ban lifted. Now, Grenell absolutely denies this. He's acknowledged that he supports the Tate brothers, but he's denied playing a hand in getting the travel ban lifted. But we know that he spoke with the Romanian foreign minister at the Munich Security Conference, and we know that the case of the Tate brothers was raised, and
Yes.
this was something which the spokeswoman told me was orchestrated by the Tate team, and then within a couple of days, I'm told that prosecutors called the lawyers for the Tates and said, "What do the Americans want?" And they were told, "Well, what they want is to be able to travel freely." And almost immediately, the travel ban is lifted, and the brothers are on a plane to Florida.
They arrive back in the U.S. They are sort of denounced by Ron DeSantis as they come back into Florida. Andrew Tate makes his way out to California, and then, if I'm not mistaken, pretty soon after arrival back in the country, faces another accusation of sexual assault.
That's right. Yeah, they kind of embark on this sort of publicity tour of right-wing America, and then get to California. Andrew Tate tweets at the California governor, "I'm in LA, please begin criminal charges." He kind of always likes to taunt the authorities in this kind of way. And then very shortly after goes to a hotel where he meets up with a model named Brianna Stern, who he'd had a kind of on and off relationship with. And she then subsequently went to the police and alleges that he, during that encounter, strangled her, battered her around the head, left her with bruising to the face in a very similar way to that which has been described by other women. She went to a doctor and was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome. And so she makes this allegation. And so again, the brothers have been freed, and within days, there's another woman who now says that she's been violently sexually assaulted by Andrew Tate. I should say, the LA District Attorney decided not to prosecute in that case, citing a lack of evidence. And the brothers have now filed a defamation claim against Brianna Stern. They are very proactive in pursuing anyone who accuses them of wrongdoing through the courts. But again, we just have yet another woman describing the same kind of sexual assault in the immediate aftermath of these men being freed.
And so, then what? I mean, like, it's just honestly, I keep thinking, like, we keep thinking about how does this happen, and the stories happen afterwards, and people come forward, and how did it happen? How is it this is someone who, again, denies that he is committing crimes, but is quite public about, dominating, subjugating women, manipulating them. He's very public about manipulating them, very public about using them to make money for himself. Like, these are all things that he boasts about. So I don't think there's any question about that, right? So they're just free men who roam around the world now?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they have been traveling extensively. They're streaming from luxury hotels in the Bahamas or Turkey or Kazakhstan or back in the US, or Hong Kong recently. And meanwhile, they're denying any wrongdoing. They're continuing to say that this case against him is going nowhere. When I met them, they told me the prosecution was doomed and there was absolutely zero chance of this case ever going to trial. And this narrative, when I started reporting this story, was beginning to gain some traction. Other mainstream outlets were beginning to pick up these claims and report that this is what the Tate brothers are saying. There was an article shortly before I began reporting in the Spectator magazine in the UK, in which the journalist predicted that all of the charges against the brothers were just going to melt away and come to nothing. And I kind of felt like, wow, people are really buying this story, and yet we don't know what the evidence is in this case. We know what they've said online, but we don't know what's in those files. And so I kind of wanted to get behind that.
Yes, you're talking about the Romanian case.
The Romanian case, exactly.
Which is not dismissed, right? It's just that they're allowed to travel, but presumably they still face a trial for it. I mean, Lord knows how they would get them back to Romania.
Well, it's a funny thing because they do return to Romania periodically. Andrew Tate's still the only remaining constriction on his liberty is that he has to return periodically to check in at a police station in relation to one aspect of a case, which is relating to the alleged rape of a minor. They do comply with those restrictions, but one of the things that interested me was the kind of why of all of that. Why are they going back there? And actually, there's this whole other dimension to this, which is that now British police, who have finally got to grips with the nature of Andrew Tate's webcam operation that he launched in the UK on British soil, have now filed criminal charges against both brothers in Britain. So they face 21 combined counts of rape and human trafficking in the UK, and there is an international warrant out for their arrest. But the Romanian courts have ruled that they cannot be extradited to Britain until the case in Romania has fully run its course. And so all the while it remains in this state of suspended animation where the indictment's been sent back. It still hasn't been refiled. The procedural errors have not been fixed. The second case seems to be going nowhere. But the case is still open. It means they don't have to go back to the UK to face justice, and nothing's happening in Romania pretty much. And so in the messages I obtained between the brothers and their advisors, they were openly discussing how they were being protected by Romania.
You have people should read the piece. You have access to a tremendous amount of documentation. I mean, text messages from them, some of the prosecutorial files, right? Yes?
That's right. Yeah.
You've seen some of the files
Yeah.
of the case. You've seen
Yeah.
like, tell me a little bit about the case. I mean, how strong the case is in the Romanian case.
Well, so prosecutors in Romania, when they raided the brothers' compound outside Bucharest after this tip-off from the US Embassy, they acquired a really vast trove of digital evidence. They seized the brothers' phones and their computers, and from that, they got hold of just a huge volume of text messages that the brothers had exchanged over the years with each other, with their associates, and with these women that they were recruiting. And the evidence in those text messages is pretty overwhelming. You can see the brothers, you can see them, kind of recruiting women. You can see the false promises that they make to these women. You can see the pressure that they apply. And in just about every country in the world, it is illegal to use psychological coercion, force fraud, or
Right.
coercion to recruit women into sex work. So while webcam work is not in and of itself
Of
illegal,
course. Yeah.
to coerce women into doing it is. And the technique that the brothers used very closely resembles what sex trafficking experts and prosecutors call the lover boy method. So it's a kind of well-known technique of systematically romancing women with the explicit aim of compelling them into sex work and controlling their income. And that's clearly what the brothers were doing over a long period of time. And you can see them doing it in the messages. I mean, they're very prolific on text, so they're actually using WhatsApp groups to issue instructions to their sex workers after recruiting them. And you can see how the recruitment plays out, but also how these women are threatened and dominated while they're working for the Tates, how they're banned from leaving the Tates properties, how they are told that they're not to be in contact with other men, with their friends and family. One of the most striking examples of all of this, he would post these kind of like live tutorials, and one of them, he was sharing screenshots of the way in which he recruited this woman, and the lies he was telling her, and he was bragging in the war room that he's lying to her, he's making stuff up, he's confusing her, he's like falsifying information and falsifying, screenshots of communications with other people and sending them to her to kind of bamboozle and confuse her. And he's like laying it all out. This is all narrated in the story, but like it's so clear that this is such a deliberate effort to subjugate these women. And then you have members of this men's network, the War Room, following along delightedly and saying this is all such a beautiful game of chess and congratulations. Just kind of enraptured by his ability to totally strip these women of their agency.
You just said a beautiful game of chess, and that brings us to a sort of dark and incredibly sort of pathos-ridden context here, which is the boys are the sons of a U.S. service member, black man who served in the U.K., met a British woman, and they got together and had 3 children, I believe, right?
That's right.
The
Yeah.
2 boys and a daughter. And the father seems like a fascinating, tortured, but clearly profoundly sort of like brilliant and charismatic figure. Talk a little bit about the father, who Tate says he sort of models himself after, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So the Tate brothers' father was called Emery Tate. As you say, he served in the U.S. Air Force. He was also a celebrated chess master after being discharged from the Air Force with conditions interfering with military service, including narcissistic personality disorder, pretty notably. And he became very paranoid in the years after his discharge. He felt this, as Andrew Tate has himself described, his father felt that the world was a scary place in which people were out to get you, and felt that the family car was being followed and that they were being monitored by the CIA, and told his sons, your Tates, they're going to come for you too. And so this kind of this paranoid worldview that the Tate brothers have, in which everything, any kind of consequence they ever face, is a matrix attack, is like the system out to get them. You can see its roots in what their father taught them. But not only that, he was extremely violent with them. And Tristan Tate described to me how when he stepped out of line from like the age of 7, his dad would beat him with a belt until his skin was striped red. And Andrew Tate has talked about lying awake for hours at night in terror of being beaten by his father. But in the brothers' telling of this is all an essential part of becoming a man. And they've both spoken about how they will beat their own children and they think this is important. And so you can just see this sort of intergenerational story of trauma and brutality passing down from one generation to the next. And not only that, but their father left a number of social media posts which kind of seemed to serve as an ideological roadmap for Andrew Tate. He talked
Yes.
about um, the insanity of the ruling elite and the matrix and the repression of alpha males. And he
Yeah.
kind of argued that mature men should be allowed to have sex with pubescent girls. And he occupied a number of these stances, which have, really kind of closely track with the kinds of things that Andrew Tate tends to say online. So their father was a huge influence, and it's very clear that these guys were, to my mind, traumatized as very small children, and that we are now all feeling the consequences of that. Because the extent of their global fame is such that their own trauma is now playing out, in millions of homes where young men are now espousing these kinds of violent and toxic views.
Yeah, he said at one point, I think he said, "My father, like, was a monster who raised a monster as he should," or something like that. There's some line along those
That's right.
lines that, he was abusive and terrible, and I was terrified of him, and that's the right way to do it, and I look forward to hitting my kid, he says.
That's right. Yeah.
How broad there was an effort to a somewhat successful effort to deplatform Andrew Tate and the Tates after the charges in Romania, but it seems like some of the, Elon Musk, of course, restored Andrew Tate's X account when he took over the platform. How broad is their reach right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the effort to deplatform him, it came right after the brothers were arrested for the first time in Romania, but before the arrest was really publicized. And so they were able to kind of dismiss that as being like it was a prank, it was nothing. Quite soon after that, there was a campaign by feminist and anti-fascist groups to deplatform Andrew Tate just because of the kind of overt misogyny and violence of the kinds of things he was preaching. And he was ejected from more mainstream social media. But actually, the bans just really enhanced his profile and his fame, and he was able to position himself as a free speech martyr. He was, had his first appearance on the Tucker Carlson show, where Tucker Carlson kind of really portrayed him as being someone who was being silenced by the elites. And then when they were later rearrested and kind of publicly indicted on human trafficking charges, it was sort of like the stage had been set. There was already this idea that they were being silenced, that they were being targeted. And so I kind of think that paved the way for people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and so on to stand up and defend them and say, this is all part of the same campaign to shut them down. I think that the problem now is not only has Elon Musk reinstated Andrew Tate's account on X, where he's followed by about 11 million people, he also signed a very lucrative contract with Rumble, the right-wing streaming service, which back in 2022 had just received big investments from JD Vance and Peter Thiel. And he is prolific on Rumble. He produces a load of content on there. But there are also all of these fan accounts. So everyone who signed up to Hustlers University, which has now been rebranded The Real World, it's the same deal. There's an affiliate marketing program. These guys pump out Tate's content. They have access to this library of clips. And it would be pretty much impossible to shut all of those accounts down. There are like tens of thousands of them, if not more. And so even if you did manage to ban the Tates from social media, say, I think the idea that you could squash all of those fan accounts that are being directly fed by the Tate brothers and with the content that they're making is pretty much impossible. And so in that way, I think the genie is really out of the bottle, it's pretty hard to see how this thing could be stopped.
It's pretty depressing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say. I find the story so enraging, but I guess it's sort of a piece with a lot of things that we've seen over the last 10 years, which is like there's not really any justice in this world. And, you know, powerful people get away with things. I just think it's so wild that we're going through the entire Epstein story after he's dead, in retrospect, in the rearview mirror with the adult survivors. And this story is there at the same time,
I agree.
happening right now, like every, almost beat for beat. And in fact, Tate praises Epstein a few times. He says, he had access to pussy. That's why he was powerful. Look at all the powerful friends he had. Like and you've started to see some people around the edges. Nick Fuentes, the sort of, neo-Nazi streamer. Nick Fuentes, the sort of, let's call him Nazi sympathetic streamer, anti-Semitic streamer who, has sort of defended Epstein a little bit, and you sort of seen around the edges, the sort of edgelord, trollish part. But Tate has been praised by, Charlie Kirk before he died was praising Andrew Tate. He's connected to the president's two of the president's sons. He's been praised by Don Jr. He's he's essentially protected by MAGA world, by the administration, whether actively or just sort of functionally through association.
I think that's right. Yeah, these guys are sort of treated in some ways intellectually as though they're fringe figures because their views are so extreme. But these guys are not on the fringes. These guys are right at the heart of the establishment in a bunch of ways. They're mainstream. They are globally famous to an almost unprecedented degree. I don't know if you'd find a person who didn't know who they were and didn't know something about them, and yet they're able to operate in this way with impunity, and it's pretty shocking. Andrew Tate has kind of made a big thing recently of saying, well, I'm not in the Epstein files, so that proves I'm innocent. It's like, well, but you are in the Andrew Tate files. Like,
Right.
I've seen him.
Right.
We're not saying you're associated with Epstein, but there is a huge amount of evidence of, like, as you say, very systematized exploitation of women over a very long period of time. And the use of enablers and enforcers and other women to lure in new recruits in a way that I agree is chillingly reminiscent of Epstein's own techniques. So it is extraordinary to me that so many of the people who decried Epstein, who have, absolutely railed against his own conduct, are now so willing to embrace and carry water for the Tate brothers.
Heidi Blake is an investigative reporter of The New Yorker. She wrote this piece that we've been discussing, Andrew Tate's Empire of Abuse, in The New Yorker, which is a magazine that you should subscribe to if you can afford it. It's definitely worth the price. Heidi, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.